You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the journalist and author Rachel Shabi and the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Wallis. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Metro reports on the findings of a cross-party group of MPs that the BBC chairman Richard Sharp wasn't sufficiently transparent about his dealings with Boris Johnson in the lead-up to his appointment. The Mail describes a summit attended by both Remain and Leave supporting MPs as a secret plot to unravel Brexit. According to the Financial Times, Taiwanese officials have said they're very accustomed to having Chinese spy balloons enter their airspace, as they have in the US and Canada in recent days. The Eye hears that Rishi Sunak could soon face a rebellion from within his own Conservative ranks over the government's handling of sewage in rivers. The Times, meanwhile, says water companies are to escape the threat of big fines over the issue. The Prime Minister offers his thanks to some readers who've raised £1 million for victims of the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. The Express leads with what it calls a damning report into a deepening care crisis, which is leaving desperate pensioners struggling to get the support they need. The Guardian carries criticism from Labour over how the government spends its own in-house expenses, allegedly using taxpayers' money on luxury trips and meals. And the Star tells us that with temperatures in some parts reaching 15 Celsius, the UK will be hotter than Paris on Tuesday, which is Valentine's Day. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Rachel Shabi and Wallis. Welcome to you both. Let us start with the Metro and their headline, "It's a murky business." Relating to what, Rachel? What are they referring to?
It most certainly is. They're referring to Richard Sharp's position as BBC head. So this is, there's a report looking into his appointment has just concluded. And it is quite a brutal report. John Nicholson, who sits on the cross-party committee that looked into this, gave an interview with Sophie Ridge this morning, who was doing media rounds, and that interview is worth looking at in full, I think, because he was saying, look, the Sharp's position is now completely untenable. He's got to go. Otherwise, he said, it looks a bit like Banana Republic. So just a reminder, Sharp helped to facilitate a loan for Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister, £800,000 loan, just before being made chair of the BBC. He didn't mention that in his job application for the BBC. He didn't think it was important. It clearly is important. It clearly is corrupt. And it's hard to argue that he's capable of deciding BBC impartiality, given all this. And indeed, John Nicholson MP did say that he's been deluged with messages from BBC staff expressing exactly that it now brings the BBC into disrepute and hence makes Sharp's position untenable.
Yes, Mr Sharp does say that he did follow all the rules, but Shadow Cabinet Minister Lisa Nandy is saying that cronyism is dragging down the BBC. Others have said that his position is untenable, but who is responsible for telling him to go or otherwise, Jake?
Well, I mean, you're right. Richard Sharp himself maintains that he did nothing wrong and that he's innocent of any accusations of cronyism. Whichever way you look at it, from the outside, it doesn't look great. The fact that he, helped to arrange this loan for Boris Johnson, then was appointed chairman of the BBC shortly afterwards. But I think that also it's important to recognise that Richard Sharp has been a lightning rod for criticism since he took over at the BBC, because he's from the right, not from the left. And so he's always going to be a target for people who are politically motivated to try to bring him down, both within the BBC and outside of it. I don't mean to suggest that, sort of come out and defend the allegations. That's for him to do, not for me. but I would simply put it in political context, because it's a very important and significant job to be chairman of the BBC, and he's not your normal candidate who would normally take the job.
Do you think he should quit?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's for him to decide. I mean, it's very difficult to judge when he's maintaining his innocence as he is, but certainly as a result of the mounting pressure, it's going to be hard for him to sustain his position if it continues. But let's just see what happens over the next day and the coming weeks, and to see whether he can ride out the storm and carry on.
We shall see, indeed. Let's move to the Mail, and this very interesting story about a Brexit summit. Lord Frost is warning that it's a plot to undermine Brexit after leading Remainers held a secret summit on EU relations. Take us into this story, Rachel.
Yeah, I feel like I've read that headline, plot to undermine Brexit, a gazillion times during the good old Brexit years. I mean, it's the classic sort of betrayal narrative that the sort of extreme Brexit supporters have always had. And so there was a cross-party meeting the other day where, secret meeting, but it was reported, where members literally cross-party gathered to say, look, it's not working. Clearly, it's not working. I think we can all agree. Britain is dawdling and not coming out of the pandemic recovery in a way that is comparable to other G7 countries. It's lagging far behind. One of the reasons for that is cited as Brexit. And so this meeting is now being cast by Lord Frost, who's the ultimate Brexit fundamentalist. The definition of a fundamentalist, if you looked it up, would be a picture of Lord Frost, someone who keeps saying, oh, it's not that Brexit has failed, it's just that we haven't done it properly. He's saying that that is putting Brexit at risk of betrayal. So that's the story.
Yes, Lord Frost is saying that this gathering of prominent politicians and business chiefs and ex-civil servants is showing a will, as he describes it, to unravel the deal that he helped to negotiate with Brussels, Jake.
It's a strange story, this, because it was broken by The Observer on Sunday, and they reported it as a secret-ish summit, I suppose. I mean, it's difficult to say that it's secret when so many senior figures attended, but it was notable for it being cross-party and also containing both Remainers and Brexiteers, prominent Brexiteers attended, including Michael Gove, Michael Howard, Nigel Lawson, and others. And so really it was a gathering of very senior figures, both in the world of politics and business and government, to discuss how to improve on our position outside the EU. Now we've left, how to make a better go of it. And the Mail and Lord Frost seem to have come one day late to the story and to be blowing it up as if it was a secret plot to undermine Brexit, which it doesn't seem to me that it necessarily was. I think that Rachel's right that Brexit hasn't been a smooth ride so far. It's been a bumpy road, and it's coincided with the pandemic and other challenges, the energy challenge and others, which has made life even more difficult for us. But certainly, in my opinion, it's succeeded in one way, which is that it's returned largely our sovereignty, or our ability to decide who rules us and who makes our laws, and to vote them out if they fail to do so. That hasn't completely been rehabilitated yet, but it's largely won in those terms, and the rest of it has got to be worked out over the coming years.
So you think a bit of a non-story from the Mail, then?
No, I wouldn't say it's a non-story. It's quite a big story. I just think that framing it as a plot to undermine Brexit, whether it was the Mail doing it or Lord Frost doing it or whatever, seems to me to be slightly overcooking it. It was a meeting of people across both parties and both sides of the Brexit divide to see how we can better make a go of Brexit. I'm not sure it was necessarily a plot to undermine it.
OK. Clarified. The Guardian, let's move on to that newspaper, Rachel, and these questions over government expenses. What exactly are we talking about here?
Yeah, so the Labour Party is launching this campaign, effectively looking at Tory Conservative ministers basically living it up at the public's expense, using the public quote like a cash machine. And saying that they're using taxpayer-funded credit cards to spend on, luxury travel, luxury hotels. And I think this is being reported as a bid to further inflict damage on the Conservatives' reputation as, being sound on money and capable of managing public finances. I'm not sure about this one. I feel like the Labour Party at the moment is a bit scattergun in its attacks on the Conservatives. I feel like they would get more mileage by sticking to one thing and just hammering it. So, I mean, it's interesting to me that we've got a story in The Guardian as well about another dodgy PPE contract that the government waved through its VIP lane after the then Conservative chair was approached by a local Tory activist, and half of the PPE, just under half, in this 25.8 million government contract was unusable. I feel like that is a better line of attack because it is just such a nakedly corrupt story of siphoning public funds during a time of crisis, during an emergency, into the hands of their mates and Tory donors. I feel like this campaign, it may have value about the Conservatives using public funds as a cash machine, but it's not really of the same scale or the same scandal, I think, as something like PPE and the VIP loans.
Jake, what do you make of this story? I mean, the top line is that spending on government-issued credit cards has risen by 70%, I believe, since 2010.
That's right. These are called GPCs, or government procurement cards, used by the civil service. The Foreign Office spends quite a lot on them because they've got diplomatic obligations and so on and so forth. But David Cameron, when he first came in, pointed them out as an example of waste. At the time, the budget was about 85 million, something like that. That's since risen to almost 150 million pounds that's being spent. And there were some details in the piece, some examples, including something like, I don't know, £1,500 spent by Liz Truss and her advisors in Jakarta, I think, at some restaurants, and Rishi Sunak spending, or his department spending £3,000 on pictures for the walls and things. It's quite hard to judge whether these are legitimate uses of government money or not in isolation. For example, we don't know how many officials Liz Truss took to these restaurants, and so it's difficult to judge. But overall, as an example of government waste, it does appear to be pretty compelling, given the fact that it's increased from 85 million in 2010 to 150 million today.
Rachel, we've just got under a minute for this last story in The Times. Water companies are set to avoid big fines for spilling sewage into rivers and seas, as ministers fear that multi-million-pound penalties could backfire. How so? How are they going to avoid these fines?
Well, that's right. So the context is that the Times today is launching this campaign to rid Britain's rivers and waterways of pollution, sewage and other forms of pollution, and it joins the eye in this. So this double-pronged campaign that is focusing on pollution in our water, which seems interesting. It's gaining momentum. And the worry is that the Environment Secretary, Theresa Coffey, she thinks that the fines imposed on private water companies for spilling sewage into our rivers, and it's pretty horrific. We've seen pictures from around the country of the level of pollution and the damage that this is causing. But she says that they're disproportionate and is walking back the plan. So that's why it's happening. It's also happening at the same time that Sunak is facing a rebellion for wanting to scrap the laws, EU laws, this Brexit bonfire. He wants to scrap laws that regulate clean water in the UK, and even, it faces a House of Lords rebellion over that.
Yeah, campaigners and opposition politicians saying that rowing back on the plan for higher fines sends the wrong signal. Rachel and Jake, for the moment, thank you. We are going to take a break. Coming up, it appears the US and Canada aren't the only ones to have Chinese spy balloons in their airspace recently. We'll discuss that and more next. Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Rachel Shabi and Jake Wallis-Simons. Welcome back. Let us have a look at the Times, first of all, and this story about Trussites I think that's what they call Liz Truss followers. I might just be making that up. But they're insisting that her tax-cutting manifesto should now be put before the Chancellor once again. Apparently one of the most prominent insisted yesterday that the former Prime Minister's mini-budget was not to blame for the market turmoil that forced her from office. Discuss, Rachel.
I think Trussites is the term. It seems to me that they call themselves that, don't they? Which is bizarre. But equally bizarre is their insistence so soon after Truss was roundly banished from politics after, catastrophic havoc and damage to the economy. It's extraordinary that they're coming back saying that didn't happen. That wasn't us. That wasn't to do with the low tax thing that spooked the markets. So yes, that is actually what they're coming back and saying, that cutting taxes is the solution to all Britain's ills. It's worth mentioning that they're doing this in the context of, the last few years seeing just eye-watering wealth gap in this country. The divide between the rich and the poor is just so stark. And it's also worth pointing out that the sort of billion pound profits that the likes of, Shell and BP announced this week, in that context, raising taxes on the highest earners would be enough to pay striking teachers, nurses, etc., several times over.
Jake, do you think it's too soon to broach the subject of tax cuts?
I think that, certainly it was Liz Truss's fault that the markets went crazy and everything crashed and she was booted out of office. There's no two ways about that. But I would also say that she did a great service to people who argue for low tax by trying to implement those ideas in such a cack-handed way. The main thing that she did so appallingly was to have these tax cuts unfunded, so to be funded by borrowing. And that really is the heart of what spooked the markets at the time. But I do think that there is a very strong argument, nevertheless, for taxes to be brought down in a sane and balanced and proper way. In particular, corporation tax, which is rising to 25%. We've already seen it drive AstraZeneca out of this country, and it's going to drive other companies out as well. We saw Mulberry, the store on Bond Street, closing because of the VAT breaks for tourists being closed as well. And it just is a fact that taxes in this country are far, far too high. They're the highest they've been for, 70 years or something. And that is dampening growth. And we do need growth if the country is going to go back to prosperity. So I think that they're making a sort of a good point that we do need tax cuts, but we need to have it in a sane, balanced and proper way.
Let's talk about the unidentified flying objects. 4 have been in North American airspace. One brought down not so long ago, obviously bordering Canada as well. This article in the Financial Times is saying that dozens of Chinese military balloon flights have crossed Taiwan's airspace in recent years, and it's nothing unusual, they're saying, for them. Rachel.
Yeah, this is quite an interesting story because according to this report, Taiwan's defense ministry, up until now, and indeed around a year ago, was saying, well, this has only happened once in the last year. And now they're saying, no, it happens all the time. It's like, come very frequently. The last one just a few weeks ago, quote from a Taiwanese official of the Chinese balloon. So this is quite a change. And I wonder if, the 2 military balloons that were shot down have sort of precipitated a new candor around the frequency of these military balloons flying over Taiwanese airspace.
Yeah, it is quite interesting, the turn of events, Jake. And one person that was briefing on the matter saying that such incursions were happening on average once a month.
That's right. I used to live in Taiwan some time ago, and there is a sense of this big malevolent neighbor just existing off the coast that's always there, that's a constant threat. And I think that that's a sense that the Americans are starting to get as well. and elsewhere in the West. And these spy balloons, if that's what they are, do seem to be reinforcing that. There have been dozens across Taiwan regularly, and they've been let off by the Chinese Air Force or the Chinese Rocket Force, whatever that is. And according to defense experts, they're thought to be gathering atmospheric data to be used in terms of when they launch missiles to make sure they hit their targets, and radar as well. So these do seem to have a very clear military application. It's not just over Taiwan they've been found, also over Japan and the Philippines and elsewhere in Southeast Asia, and now over the United States as well, although the one over the United States last week was particularly large. So this obviously is a big threat from China. It's very worrying, and it shows that China is thinking several steps ahead than we are.